So it's now 7:05. I'll call the meeting of the Milton School Building Committee to order on August 26, 2024. With us tonight from the committee is do roll call attendance like I typically do. Scott Tereshak, Mark Loring,
here.
Yeah, Awkward Vaughn.
Present.
Thank you, Glenn Hoffman.
Yes.
There we go. And Tim Lombard.
I'm present.
Yeah. Dr. Selena Miranda.
Present. And just so you know, I actually don't have video just because I'm not enabled.
Okay, I'll do it again right now. I made you a co-host. You might want to try it again. It should get you.
You can use mine.
There we go. And last is Mr. John Cohen. Welcome, sir.
Present.
All right.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And Carrie just showed up too. Perfect. Get her in. We'll have full attendance. Let's make Carrie a co-host. Sing at the video. There you go. Hey, Carrie.
Hi, how are you?
Just in time for attendance. Great job. All right. So item 2 on the agenda is citizen speak. So we reserve the first 15 minutes of our meetings for any citizen that would like to speak. We ask that you raise your hand, state your name and address, and then please limit your comments to 3 minutes. So we have a couple attendees. So just see if anybody has something they want to say, and just pause for a minute. All right, seeing none. All right, we'll get moving. Item 3 is the approval of our past minutes, which was Monday, August 12th, 2024. So as always, Seamus, thank you for sending them around in our packets. So just open it up to see if anybody has any edits, comments, or anything like that in regards to the minutes from our last meeting. Seeing none. Yeah.
I just have a comment on item 3.01, and just it's maybe minutia, but that I had asked you for the list to get to me. Remember, to get me a list, and I don't see that in there at all.
Yep. James, is that something you can amend to the minutes?
Yep, I can add a that you were gonna send an email to John with what you guys need. I'll add a line there in that meeting section.
Yeah, and John, are you referring to your request to me for the expenditures?
No, you were going to send me a list of what to go to the board for.
Yeah.
You did,
Yep.
but it was just in that section.
Okay. So yeah, Seamus, if you could just edit that.
Yep.
So with that edit, just seeing if there's any other comments that people have. And if hearing no comments, we can make a motion to approve with that edit, as long as Ms. Cohen's fine with that too.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with that edit.
Is there a second?
Second.
A second. Oh.
Beat you to it, Aqua. All right. And any further discussion? Assuming none. All right. So roll call vote because we're remote. Scott Tereshak.
Yes.
Mark Loring.
Yes.
John Cohen.
Yes.
Selena Miranda.
Yes.
Carrie Hurley.
Yes.
Aqua Bong.
Yes.
Glenn Hoffman.
Yes.
And Tim Lombard.
Yes.
All right. Great. So moving on for item 4, new business, 4A, which is MSBA update. So as most of you know, we sent along, MSBA had contacted the district I think it was last week in regards to an update from them. So what happens is we submitted our statement of interest, as everybody's aware, in the spring. We got an update from them that they want to come tour the schools. So it's basically like the filtering process with MSBA. We passed the first filter and now we're on to the next one. They're going to be coming out to the schools September. Peter, do you happen to remember the exact date? I thought it was like September 14th.
I believe it's the 17th.
17th, and it was a teen. Apologies. But so it's good news. So for some of you that recall, I think it was in 2020, MSBA actually, we made it to this similar step, but their visitation to the school at the time was all basically through video conferencing. So we had Dr. Redden and Holly Concannon, principals at Collycott Cunningham, and Cunningham walking around with iPads, basically showing what the spaces are. At least this time they'll get a in-depth, in-person, review of everything. So essentially with that thing, and perfect timing, Mark, I was going to open it up, see if people have questions or comments in regards to that. So Mark, go for it.
Sorry, just quick clarification. What was the last year we got to this step of the process? Because I know they didn't come out last year.
Yeah, I believe it was 2020. And the only reason I think it was 2020 was mainly due to the pandemic. We were kind of in the midst of the pandemic, which didn't allow them to come into the schools. So that's my timing. I can confirm what that was from before. I just don't have it totally offhand. That's what I recall.
So it is September 17th at 1 o'clock.
Okay. Tim?
Is that something you would want us to be present for, Sean?
I'll find out. I don't know if the entire committee would need to be present because I think it may be a little overwhelming. But maybe a few of us to go with them to kind of see if they do have any additional questions for us. I was planning on attending it, but I'll find out.
Thanks.
And even further, if we needed to, I could find out if they could do a debrief even after that meeting. If it's a day that we can all go, and maybe just schedule one of our meetings, at 2 o'clock, if they think it's going to take an hour, at 2 o'clock, and kind of have a debrief with them if possible. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know and I can look into it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Seeing none. All right, moving on. So item 4B for new business, which is our fall town meeting warrant article for a funding article. So I was looking through kind of what the schedule of the rhythm was last year for town meeting. And for the fall town meeting, which was held, I think it was in the first week of December, the warrant for that town meeting last year closed kind of a third of the way through. I think the 22nd of September, they closed the warrant. So for us, it'd be important, essentially at our next meeting, to be able to have a vote on these articles and get the language together, which I'm working on currently. So with that, what I wanted to do is have a meeting now that we can kind of dive into some of the questions that we may have or comments or anything like that leading up to it, so that we were prepared in 2 weeks that we can actually take a vote on this and make our recommendations for it. So with that, I'll just kind of open it up for any questions or comments that we can kind of just start diving into it. I see Mark smiling. I knew it was coming, so go for it, Mark.
I was waiting. I'm trying to watch my airtime. So to be clear, the initial article that we talked about last week was a funding article that would provide us enough funding for the designers, specifically, maybe also the OPM a little bit, but we feel better about the OPM budget thus far. That would get us through construction documents. Right, and fund us kind of through the remainder of that portion.
Yeah, I'll let Shanali talk a little bit about it, but what it would be full construction documents for the road realignment and then design development documents for the overall program for the school. So they wouldn't be full construction documents for the school, but it would definitely be a much more expanded, detailed set of documents that we would have with that funding. So Shanali, if you can kind of just touch on
Yeah.
that.
So the DD, we gave a rough estimate to both the Seans for the DD for the two buildings and for the CDs for the road construction so that we could do a preliminary site package to get the site work done prior to the building construction. And by doing that, there is a little bit of cost savings because you don't have to go through the same process with the GC for the buildings as you do with the roads. And I can let Sean or Seamus, or Sean's not here, I forgot. Seamus speak to that. Yeah. So there is a different process, but it does give you some savings, but more importantly, the savings comes from the time because you're able to start that site work prior to the building drawings being done, and that the escalation costs are severely decreased. And the site is already then prepped and ready for the GC to get on site. I'm currently getting fees from all of the consultants to finalize their DD numbers and get all of their fee estimates all the way through CA. It's still going to take me a little while. It's actually very not hard, but it's like it takes time, the process, because there's a little bit of back and forth. So all the consultants have been notified. I'm waiting for numbers to come in, and then we'll do a little bit of back and forth to make sure that the scope is aligned all the way through CA. So that's what we're working on at the moment, as well as the SD package.
And Carrie, just before calling it too, just for everybody's knowledge, I know most people know it, but more for the public too. So DDs are what we're saying, design development. CDs are construction documents, and then CA is construction administration. So after a bid is done, administering the construction to the completion. So
yeah, and I would just like to also point out that DD, the design development phase, is a really critical phase because it's linking what we're conceptualizing in the schematic and making it substantially more real. We're talking to the consultants, getting a deeper understanding of the correct sizes of the structure, of how deep the ductwork is going to be, the locations, really understanding what the back of house spaces are going to be. For instance, as a small example, like the electrical closets, right? Like we need to understand precisely how big they are, what the footprint is, and how many panels. And so DD starts to get into that level of detail, whereas construction documents do the actual construction details. But it's that really vital coordination that we need to understand so that the building will end up looking the way that you're expecting it to look. So it's, in my opinion, one of the most important phases that we need to really dig deep in.
Carrie, you have any hand raised?
Yes, I was just curious with the news of the MSBA, how that might impact. Are we going to continue to do kind of the parallel paths process in this? I'm just curious.
No, great question. So it's one of the ones that kind of jumped out at me when that news came up. But my anticipation would be any funding that we would be allocated, we would wait to hear from MSBA's. MSBA's direct decision is basically done, I think, December 12th or somewhere around that line. So what we, the articles that we put forward would essentially have statements on them that any of the funding that's there cannot be executed until after December 12th. You know what I mean? So just a way that we could guarantee that if we do get into MSBA, we're not going to pull the trigger on $4.5 million, and forego some of that funding. It's basically at that point, we need to make a decision as a committee, which way we want to go. And it'd be really nice to have both options available.
Thank you.
Yep. Selena?
Yeah, just a quick question on sort of these three different, steps, how far out would that take us in terms of that work? Just thinking about our discussion around when we would go before the town for a vote, and how much work would we still be able to do as we wait for the town vote?
Yeah, so the three things you're talking about are the and just trying to be exact. So the construction,
the DD and the CD and the CA.
Yeah, so the CA definitely wouldn't come until later. Until we get full funding and break ground, we wouldn't be into that. The plan would be for this next phase of funding that we're doing for the $4 million plus whatever OPM fees we have to do, roughly. That would get us to full construction documents for the road, and then design development documents for the building. So there'd still be further detailing that need to happen. The timing of that, I know Shanali's working on a schedule of that to kind of see how that aligns with the anticipated townwide vote in the spring, if that's when this is going to go. So I believe by our next meeting, Shanali, I don't think you have the schedule ready for
I have a draft. I think in our last conversation where we reviewed it, I needed to understand when those dates in the spring were going to happen so that I could backtrack it. And as soon as I get the dates, I can shift everything. For instance, DD, a full complete DD is 4 months, but I don't know what my exact start and end date is. I want to shift it so it aligns with the town of Milton's requirements for town meeting and all of the necessary pre-deadlines to get to there. So until I have those dates, I need to adjust it accordingly. So as soon as I get the dates, the schedule's all ready to go. I need to plug in those dates and just shift the things. But like DD I have figured out it's a 4-month process for us. And whether I start December 12th or January 1st, well, not January 1st, maybe January 3rd, and then or February 15th, it's still 4 months. But for me to get you to the end date is when I need some of those dates. And then I can give you a more formal presentation on the schedule and how it plays out.
Mark, you're recognized.
What's the timeline? Because I think the DDs for the road actually are probably, from a public perspective, less impactful than updated design, drawings, renderings of the physical building itself as we get to kind of out in front of voters. If we assume another December town meeting, and again, this is just to throw random numbers here and say hey, that'll be wrapped up by December 15th, whatever that might be. It's probably a week earlier than that. What is the timeline y'all would anticipate for kind of a DD set for the buildings, which are obviously more complicated? Is that also about 4 months? Is that 2 months? What is that?
So I have the full CD site package occurring between the 50% and 75% DD of the building set. So it's a 2.5 to 3 month schedule. I don't know if that's precisely answering your question, but the expectation is that the site package will be completed prior to the completion of the DD set, if that makes sense.
If I can jump in too, Mark, sorry. There's definitely going to be a synergy between the building design and the site package, because most likely that road's going to be full of utilities coming up to serve the building. So understanding what the anticipated sizes of some of that stuff is, that's where the package for the road is going to become important too, as we build that road, to make sure we're putting the utilities in there to support the building.
Yeah, totally hear that and understand that. I just think from a voter in perspective, I think right now our visualization of the road as is probably fine. I think we've made a lot of great progress too, and probably have enough progress on the design too. But obviously, the design development will get it refined even a little bit more, and that's just my mind, the sexier component where you get some actual renderings of like what space will be, and people like feel that a little bit more of, ooh, I could like sense myself in this space, versus obviously the site package being very important from a construction perspective, but again, from a just public consumption perspective, maybe less so. So, 4 months versus 2.5 months, or even 3 months, like that extra month, given the town vote is in end of April, is seems important. Like that being actually really helpful and will align pretty well.
Yeah, and I think at the end of kind of what we're working on right now, or at least in the coming months, and Chanel, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to have some exterior views of the building a little more detailed than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, we'll start to talk about materiality in the SD set, and we're still in the process of scheduling those working group meetings. As soon as we can get in front of the working group and talk to them and put to bed, sort of, so to speak, the plan and the adjacencies of all the spaces, then we can run with the materials. We're already developing palettes, but there's still an order in which we have to present things to make sure we get to the right place. So while we've done all of this materiality study, I can't move it forward until we get into those working group meetings. So hopefully next week we will have a meeting on the calendar.
And if I could expand, I think what Mark was looking for is like those kind of views of the the sexiness of this project and stuff like that.
You'll get some preliminary massing views and schematic, but those like really nice renderings, you're going to see more in the DD phase, and you're going to see them more regularly and updated more regularly. SD, it's not going to be the fully rendered, with people and trees and dogs and stuff. But in DD, you'll start to see some of that stuff. And certainly in CD, you'll start to see rendered views of specific spaces, like the gym or the auditorium. Like you'll start to get inside the building during CDs. DD will still be outside for those renderings.
Yeah, and I think where Mark was going is those renderings won't come at the 12th hour, at the end of April, first time. It's going to be coming, as we're in that 4-month period, it's going to be coming early and often as we're doing.
Yeah, so like the design process that we've gone through with SD, we're going to present to you, we're going to present to the working groups, we're going to get comments back, we're going to incorporate them and come back. So this is the continuation of the same dialogue, but instead of looking at plans, we're going to be looking at 3D views. So absolutely, you're not going to get them at the end. You're just going to get the final at the end, but you're going to have already been previewed multiple times prior to that.
That work, Mark? Cool. All right, Aqua, sorry, you have your hand raised.
Thank you for recognizing me. I'd like to understand a little bit of the process. Are we going to, could you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. At what time do we take this to the voters? Are we going to keep, it sounds like this DD and CAs and all the others are going to be some heavy financial lift. At what time are we taking it to the voters? Should we not have financial commitments to deliver on this before we start spending more money and we're not sure whether we're going to move forward or not? Maybe I'm not just understanding the process. Help me get a better picture.
No. Yeah, great question. So the intent right now for the articles that we're looking at is to have a funding article for, to take us through that next phase of development that we're talking about for design. And, part of that, there were questions that came up, as we were going through this previous exercise to get it onto the ballot, that were raised that we essentially need additional funding to address those. And the type of comments that were there, necessitate, getting to that level of detail. So that's part of the reason we're going through this. So the anticipation of the hope is that we would have a ballot questions in the spring next year to be, date and time to be determined. But, with that, what we're trying to do is expand the design a little bit further to be able to address some of the questions that came up this last time and address them so that way when it does go up again for a vote, we can get on the ballot and put it in front of people to, get it there. So that's what we're trying to do now. Obviously, this $4.5 million only takes us to a certain point in that design. We'd still need additional funding after that as part of the overall project to take it to full completion all the way through. I hope, if that didn't answer your question, feel free to follow up with any follow-ons that I might have missed or anything.
It gives me a better understanding. I'll have further questions later.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Carrie.
I'm just curious on this phase. I know we're talking about SD, which is site design, correct? Or
schematic design.
Okay.
Yeah, SD.
And we were talking about the road and utilities and infrastructure. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, is it at this point that we are prepping the site for any sort of HVAC plans that we have down the road, or is that a different time?
Yeah, so you're talking the geothermal wells.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, most likely what would happen is outside of the design of the road, the remaining land that was there, mainly the parking lots and stuff like that. The understanding is that's where most of the geothermal wells would be going from at least that's what we've heard from the consultants. Mm-hmm. So as part of that design, there's no anticipation under the road to have the geothermal wells, so they wouldn't have to be designed early on as part of this early site package, if that's kind of where your question was going.
Yeah, I think that's, mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Scott.
Thanks, Sean. Just a couple things while I was looking up while we were talking here. Mark's earlier question about the last MSBA process. It was an application from 2020, but everything was delayed that year, so they didn't actually visit the school until January of 2021. But the application was from 2020. For Shanali, for a date for the Springtown meeting, we usually don't find out for quite a while yet, right? But it's the first week of May typically. Should we just make an assumption and say go with May 1st on that and then work the schedule from there so we have something to look at?
Well, it's two things. So the town meeting's typically I think it's the first week in May for the annual town meeting. So we know that. The unknown that I think Shanali's trying to work into her schedule right now is the town-wide ballot. So, that right now, there's no schedule for that. And that's, one of the things we're requesting so that way we can understand what that date is and, push it into Shanali's timeline so we can kind of get the whole Gantt chart for the project kind of lined up and ready to go.
Okay. And do we know if that happens before or after town meeting?
It could be either. So yeah. So what happens is, to kind of go back to the process for the overall project for funding, to do a debt exclusion, you have to do two things. You have to have an article at town meeting that passes by a 2/3 majority for the overall funding of the entire project. And then you also need a town-wide ballot that it's only a 50% or 51% margin that would have to pass by. The order of which, typically the way you would do it is you do the town meeting first, so everybody's aware of what the costs are that the town meeting has approved. And then you do the ballot question following that, and that ballot question following it would then have, as we showed, it doesn't have a number value in there. It just allows you to exclude yourself from the limits of Prop 2.5. So, the timing of all that stuff, it basically falls up to the select board. And that's, one of the things we were talking with John at our last meeting, for items that we'll need to kind of progress the project and stuff like that. For what we're doing now for this article, or the funding articles we're talking about, would be, to fund for the design and, get us that way to do it. You could even put the full, I would assume you could even put the full funding now for the entire project and see kind of where that goes. And if it passed town meeting, then you'd only need the townwide ballot sometime in the spring. And then, we would be fine with that too.
Great. Thank you, Sean.
No problem. Yep. Mark, any hands raised?
Yeah, you kind of jumped or took it right out of my mind, Sean, as I was thinking about these timelines and as they line up, right? One of the concerns is the timeline between this townwide vote and the town meeting vote, and making sure that town members are clear about what the final number is and what they're going to be voting on, and having enough time to communicate that well. And the fact that the townwide ballot doesn't have a number on it, the town, the warrant vote article that the town meeting votes for does, all those pieces. And I know, we obviously disappointingly missed the opportunity to get a townwide ballot in the fall. But if I'm understanding it correct, I think to the point you're just making, like, there's nothing actually that at this point would stop us from going to the town meeting to ask for the $173 million allocation warrant at this winter town meeting, which then, if it passed, then we have that number in the books firm for a special town meeting in February and the April town meeting, whatever it might be. And again, I think that at that point, it again falls back. My understanding would be to the select board as to identify when they're putting this on the ballot. But at least the town meeting part is out of the way, right? It is done, it is accomplished, and it's not this tight kind of turnaround between we have, special town meeting 2 weeks before the townwide vote or something like that, and people feel like it is rushed or poorly communicated in terms of what that number is. So I guess my question would be, like, is there a way in which we could do kind of two warrant articles? One is full funding for the project as approved by town meeting, which, to Aqua's point, kind of gets us some confirmation as to, like, how at least that representative group of the town are feeling about our project, and gives us some data point to move forward. And then the second would be, if that doesn't pass, let's say, then it's okay, what about just funding to continue design? Because we'd assume if it doesn't pass, folks, again, are similar to, I guess, maybe what the select board, some members have said, of like wanting more information. That would be almost like the plan B. So you kind of have those two options presented in front of town meeting to get their opinion on. And again, the best case scenario related to the school is we go ahead and get the town meeting approval kind of checked off with one of two steps.
Yeah. I mean, so technically for warrant articles, we can recommend whatever we think are the right warrant articles that we want to do. So, from a process point of view, I agree. And it hit me, like, as I was talking to Scott, it's like, you can do it at the fall town meeting, check that box, have that, thing on the to-do list that we have for the project kind of crossed off if town meeting approved it. And then essentially, it would just be, working towards that townwide ballot. I think the only thing we'd want to do, similar to, what Kerry had referenced earlier too, is if we're doing any of this, it's essentially going to be a parallel path with MSBA. If we got into say we got full funding at some town meeting before the MSBA decision, I would probably want to have some type of language in there that, it's a decision point at that point. Do we go on our own at 173 million with no MSBA financing back to us, or do we pivot, move into MSBA, get a longer timeline, but get some type of reimbursement? And I know theoretically we've talked about that at least over the past 4 years as we've kind of been going through this timeline and looking at everything. But it'd be a unique one. Like, we were talking about it in theory, but have it in practicality of, both options available there. I think would that'd be a tough decision for us to kind of look at. But long-winded answer is basically, I think if we did something like that, we'd want to have some ability on there to not move forward with anything until we hear back from MSBA, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so like some type of reverter clause in saying if we get, and again, I'm as hopeful as anybody else that we get an MSBA, but I think it's still a big if, right? We're not that many steps further, and we've been scorned before. But some reverter clause, so then essentially you're saying like force us to go back. If we got an MSBA, we'd want to go back to the town essentially to have the town vote
No,
against the weather or what?
No, I don't think it'd be that, and it's probably something that I want to reach out to town council to find the correct way of crafting the language for the article, just so we have it. But I don't think it would be a reverter of like we're foregoing all that funding. I think for us it becomes a decision point of, we have the ability to have full funding, or we have the ability to go with MSBA, and then I think it falls on this committee's charge to kind of, make that decision. Obviously, it would be a lot, there's a lot of input we need from a lot of people, including school committee, including select board, and everybody, as we're going through that, because that's a huge decision there. So I don't anticipate that. Like I said, my anticipation with MSBA is low, just based on our history with them and everything. But if we did get it, it would be another thing on this project, that kind of just another curveball we get thrown as we've gone over the past couple of years. So we'll see. But for that, so that's Mark's take. I'd love to hear from other committee members, just, in regards to that, for, essentially, as Mark talked about, like 2 articles, one for the design that would just take us through, design development to go for a future funding article, funding warrant article, and funding townwide ballot. And then a separate one that would just be for the whole, 173 million, similar to what we were planning on doing for the November ballot if we got on there, which we're not. So I just want to open that up to everybody. And Mark, you've had your hand raised a couple of times, so I'm just going to jump on to Kerry first. She beat you to it.
And I
Sorry,
keep raising, I keep raising my hand too. I think that it's a brilliant idea to get that 2 warrant articles out there. One with the bigger number and then one with the more palatable number. I think the more we can get that number out into the public for them to view it and, mull it over, I think it would be wise, in my opinion. I'm kind of in Mark's camp on this one.
Yep. All right. Scott?
I think my only concern would be that it's still the select board's prerogative whether or not to allow a town vote on this at some point, right?
Yeah, correct. So
my only thought related to that before you jump in was just maybe trying to resolve some of the questions they may have between now and December would be beneficial. So maybe the sooner we get the questions, the sooner we can answer them and prepare for a December article.
Yeah, the part of some of the questions, for example, in regards to like the energy model and stuff like that, we definitely couldn't get that by December, just by the amount of work that has to go in by the consultants to do that. Mm-hmm. The intent would be is like whatever funding, whether it was the 4 million that we're talking about, or the full project funding, we wouldn't get any of that until the kind of same start date. So the design development wouldn't start till later. And that whenever that townwide ballot would occur, it would still be kind of the same start date to work towards that townwide ballot. It's just more of the town meeting member vote, or the town warrant article for the project would just be approved. So it's kind of just be a prerequisite to the townwide ballot that we'd have to do. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, and I'm thinking of I'm just trying to think of some of the hurdles. What we're doing. And that's honestly why I wanted to have this meeting tonight. We're still going to talk about this in 2 weeks too. So there's no votes scheduled for tonight. But for me, just knowing the the rhythm of last year's town meeting, it's, my anticipation is that sometime in September, the warrant would close. So we want to just kind of get whatever things that we're looking for the warrant to get ready for it. So that answer your question, Scott, previously?
I think so. I think, like I said, the main thing I just wanted to make sure is we consider what the select board had brought up as part of putting that together and put some time in to answer some of their questions. I think that will just help with the whole process.
Yep. John, you're recognized.
I'm wondering if I hear about questions from the select board, and I'm wondering what those are.
So
are you talking about the last select board meeting, the questions that came up?
Well, it's one of the to do things I gave you I sent on the email of, there was a number of different questions that came up from the select board during the last presentation that I was doing, or at least leading up to the vote. And kind of what we've been requesting is, what is that? What are the lists of all the questions or concerns that, for example, that get you to vote no, right? We're trying to change the no votes to a yes. And there were concerns that people had when they voted no. So what we need is, that entire list of what the questions and concerns are, so that we can get the consultants working on it to get you the answers so that you can understand it. That's all.
I thought a lot of the questions weren't really directed to this committee, but more to the schools themselves.
Well, either way, whatever the questions are that, are causing a no vote, we need to resolve those questions. So we need to know what that entire list of questions and answers that you guys on the select board are seeking. And then as we know what those questions are, we can answer them. You know what I mean? My concern is always, we hear a list of questions, we come back, we answer all the questions, and then there's another list of questions. And what we're trying to do is just get to a consolidated list of questions, concerns, present them to this committee. And if it's not us, it's the school committee or anybody else. And we can dive in and just, the example I use I was hearing is, the cost of energy for the entire building. What's the annual cost of energy that the building's going to use? We can get there, but it takes a lot of design. As we mentioned at the last meeting, as a HERS rater, John, the thermal envelope of the building ties into that overall energy model. So we're not there with the schematic design. We can start making assumptions as we move into design development and start building an energy model based on the building and get those numbers there. But it's just, whatever questions that, that are still there at the select board, we need to know them. And the school committee too. I know one that was before for operating for teachers and salaries and stuff like that. And I know Peter had put something together, in preparation of the last meeting prior to the vote, that we had that. So that's just an example of, you guys have questions and that's totally fine. But, we can get you the answers, but our goal at the end of this is to get everybody to a yes vote, right? So that we can build a school, solve the overcrowding. Everybody doesn't have to jump on Zoom calls anymore on Monday nights. You know what I mean? And that's all we're trying to do.
I will work on that.
Okay, thank you. And Scott, you still have your hand up. I just didn't know. Yep.
Yeah, no, you answered the question. I was just going to clarify what I meant before, but you nailed it. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Right. So what I can do, like I said, I can talk with town council and see what the draft languages would be. I'm assuming if any of you guys are looking for something similar, I would assume look at what the debt exclusion vote was for the fire stations. I think it's probably the most recent one, just for kind of what the language would look like or something like that. And I can have that ready essentially for our next meeting. I'll obviously distribute it to everybody on the committee ahead of time so you can kind of see what the language is within there. But my goal is, at our next meeting, which I believe is the 9th, the Monday after Labor Day, is to, dive into this a little bit further and, get us to a point that we can vote on recommended articles so that we can present them. So back to process, Scott, for you too, like the process by which we would be doing this is we would be drafting warrant articles and submitting them for recommendation, I believe, to the select board is the process by which we did them before. And then essentially the select board decides what goes on the warrant and what doesn't. I think that's correct. If anybody knows differently, feel free to chime in and tell me if I'm wrong. But I believe that's how we've done them previously. And nobody's correcting, so I guess that's a good thing. So any other questions or comments in regards to warrant articles or funding or anything like that? All right, hearing none. Old business, I think, is just a placeholder. Item 5 that Seamus had on there. As far as me, I don't really have anything for old business. We're in good shape. And our last agenda item for the night is future meeting dates, which was Monday, September 9th. So just a reminder for everybody that we'll meet again on that night and kind of expand this discussion a little bit further. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. All right. And so we'll do a roll call vote. Something, Tim?
I was trying to second. I was late.
Okay, gotcha. Appreciate it. All right. So yeah, roll call vote. Scott Terechak.
Yes.
Mark Loring.
Yes.
John Cohane.
Yes.
Carrie Hurley.
Yes.
Selena Miranda.
Yes.
Aqua Bond.
Yes.
Glenn Hoffman.
Yes.
Tim Lombard.
Yes.
And I've realized I forgot to call myself for every roll call vote. So Seamus, put me as a yes for all of them, please.
Will do.
All right. Thank you all. Have a good night. See you in a couple weeks.